Hi, welcome to the anatomy of an AXP CCAI integration. My name is Andrew Prokop, and for the next 30 plus slides, I hope to show you how you can take a Dialogflow CX agent and integrate it into Avaya Experience Platform. This slide presentation uses a very specific use case. I've created an artificial finance company that I've called Beyond Finance, and Beyond Finance has a voice bot and a chat bot. Both of these bots use the same Dialogflow CX agent, but they use it in different ways. I'm going to begin the presentation by talking about the agent. I'm going to talk about how that agent can understand if it's being invoked from Experience Platform. I'm going to talk about many of the webhooks that the agent uses. I want to use some level of authentication. This is a phony financial institution, but I want to make sure that the right people are getting access to their data. So I want to use Journey, and I'm going to do biometric authentication. I'll show you how I've integrated that into the CX agent. And then I'm going to show how this agent can go from Dialogflow into a live AXP agent with agent escalation. I then want to talk about workstream automation and how the CX agent can be added into AXP. Then I want to show how that automation can be built into orchestration for the flow to find the right agent, connect the caller, connect the person on the chat to a live agent. I want to, once I finished up with voice integration, I'm going to show you how I did it with web chat and how I use the AXP APIs. And lastly, I've thrown in generative AI to do conversation summary so that when a chat is escalated from a bot to a live agent, I use GPT to summarize the conversation so the agent hits the ground running without having to wade through the entire chat transcription. So how does this agent work? This is the basic flow for the Dialogflow CX agent. I begin by greeting the customer, whether it's somebody coming in on chat or somebody coming in on voice. So the agent will greet the customer. This is typically what a virtual agent will do. Next, I need to obtain the user's mobile telephone number. I need to get this number because I'm going to be using Journey for biometric authentication. Specifically, I'm going to use Face ID on the user's cell phone. So I need to know what the number at that device is. If the engagement or this conversation came through Avaya Experience Platform, meaning somebody called a telephone number and that telephone number was routed to Avaya Experience Platform, I will know the telephone number of the caller because it is a telephone call that AXP has control of. If it came through web chat, I will not know the telephone number because there may not be a telephone number. The user may be sitting on a computer, so I need to request the telephone number. In both cases, though, I will get a telephone number, whether it's automatic or whether it's by requesting it from the user. Next, I will use Journey to biometrically authenticate the user, and Journey will send a text to the user's mobile device, and that text will contain a link. The user will click on the link and then start Face ID authentication. If the user authenticates him or herself, then I want to give the user access to account information, account balance, last payment, next payment, etc., etc. In this case, if they fail authentication, I just want to end the conversation. And lastly, at any point in the conversation, I want the user to be able to escalate to a live agent. So leave the virtual agent and then move into a live agent. And in the case of chat, I want to provide the agent, the live agent, with a generative AI summary of the conversation the user had with the bot. Now that I've thought through the flow of my agent, I can go to Dialogflow CX and build that agent. And this is that agent. So it begins at the top with start. And that is where the greeting occurs. and then I check for the engagement ID. So at this point, I'm going to ask Dialogflow CX, was I invoked by Avaya Experience Platform? And if so, do I know something about this engagement? And I'll show you that in just a moment. So I check for the engagement ID. If I have an engagement ID, on the right, I will do the set phone from engagement. So I can actually go to the engagement and say, hey, what is the phone number of this person? If not, on the left, I will have to ask the user specifically what is the telephone number that you're going to use for your biometric authentication. Both of those flow into invoke journey. And so journey will then go out and send the link to the user. The user will then click the link, go through the authentication process, and then tell the agent that he or she has finished. Once he or she has said, I'm finished, then I'm going to check, go back to Journey and say, did this user actually authenticate him or herself? If the user did successfully authenticate, then I go to the left, main transactions, and now I can pull information up about the customer and get bank account information, get payment information, anything that would be considered private information because I've gone through the authentication process. If they did not authenticate, then I just end the session. Now in a real agent, I'll probably want to do something else, but for this demonstration purpose, I will just simply end the interaction with the customer. If this Dialogflow CX agent was invoked by AXP, then there will be a very specific parameter, and that will be $session.params.avaya. And within that parameter, there is something called an engagement ID. So if the engagement ID is equal to null, then it tells me that AXP was not involved in this transaction. So somebody came in through another route. I don't have any information about the caller or the customer at this point. If, however, it is not equal to null, then I will know that AXP invoked me, and I can go to AXP and ask for information about the caller. I ask for information by using the webhook capability of Dialogflow CX. So I'm going to call some application external to CX to take the engagement ID, and then with that engagement ID, give me information about the engagement. Specifically, I'm looking for who is the caller. One of the AXP customer journey APIs is Get Engagement. It allows me to send in an engagement ID and then in return get information about that engagement. What you're looking at is a page from the AXP API developers documentation. You see a link at the bottom of the page there. And so I use this API call to, again, translate an engagement ID into information about the engagement. This is what Get Engagement returns. It's a JSON structure, and there's quite a bit of information in there, but you can see there's the calling number. It's right there in the middle, the calling number. I also get the dialed number, so I know what number that this caller dialed to get into this Dialogflow CX agent. In my application, I'm only interested in the calling number, and there it is. So now I do not have to request that from the customer. I have it already. This is the webhook call that I've actually used to get that information. So I'm invoking Get Engagement, which is a REST API within AXP. Look at the part in the middle where I say JSON response equals. This is the information that I'm returning back to the CX agent. The important part is I am able to pass parameters that now can become part of the CX agent flow. So in this case, specifically, I'm passing back calling number and dialed number. And I'm obtaining calling number and dialed number from that JSON structure that was passed back to me from AXP. But now that I'm passing it back in session info.parameters.calling number, then also .dialed number, the CX agent now has access to this information. So I've moved from the AXP world back into the Dialogflow CX world. So I pass the data from one to the other using this webhook. Now look over on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. You'll see where I'm taking that information from session.params.calling number. Calling number was what I set in the webhook. It's now become part of the CX agent flow. I'm taking that and I'm assigning that to a local parameter that I call cust_phone. And I'm assigning it to a local parameter because I also want to use this same agent for the case where I have to query the caller or the user for a telephone number. So I'm putting it into this structure here so that I will have access to it later on in the logic, and you'll see that in just a moment. So what happens if I have to take the path where there is no engagement ID? What I do then is I create a parameter that I call phone, and it has an entity type of sys.phone number. That's a built-in to CX, so it knows what a phone number looks like. Look down there at the bottom where it says, please provide me with your 10-digit mobile telephone number. So I'm asking the customer for his or her telephone number, and then I'm going to assign that into a variable that then can get moved into the flow of the CX agent. And I do that here. Look at the route on the left side where it says $session.params.phone. Remember, phone was in that previous slide. If it's not equal to null, meaning if somebody entered something, then go to the other side of the screen, the right-hand side. I'm assigning that parameter phone to cust phone. So now I have the cust phone is used whether the phone number was obtained through engagement or whether it's obtained through asking the customer for the telephone number. Now that I have a telephone number, how do I do the biometric authentication? Well, again, through another webhook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke a webhook that is called check customer telephone. This in turn will invoke Journey to send the link to that telephone number. When the webhook is invoked, these variables that I'm adding into my flow are accessible to the webhook. So the webhook knows what phone number was either asked for or pulled from engagements so that it can use that in its operation to send the text message with the link. This is how the flow occurs. I, as a user, receive a text message with a link. I click on the link, and then I'm asked to authenticate myself. When I click Authenticate Device, it will go through the Face ID recognition, so I need to look at the camera. And if successful, it's going to tell me authentication is finished. I can now go back to the agent, the virtual agent, and tell it I'm finished. If I have successfully authenticated myself, I now want to give the user access to his or her account information. I do that in this case by having a database, an SQL database that contains records about customers. And so how do I get to that database? Well, yet another webhook. So I will call a webhook, which will bring information from the database into the CX agent. So I can now use that information in any of the queries that the user provides. The database is very simple. It has a primary key, and then I have first name, last name, telephone number. I have a balance, I have an address, last payment, when's the next payment due. I have a password for this account, and I have an email. So the webhook will return a customer record with all that information. Here's a snippet of that webhook. The thing I want you to pay attention to is the JSON response structure and look at the parameters. So what I'm doing is I'm passing back cust balance, last payment, address, payment due, and email. Cust balance, I've actually taken the value that's in the database and I massage it up a bit. I actually use the word dollars and cents. rather than just a dollar sign and a decimal point. And then the other items come straight from the database: last payment, address, payment due, and email. But now that I've returned this information into the Dialogflow CX agent from the webhook, it now has access again to cust balance, last payment, address, payment due, and email. And here's an example of how that's used. If the customer asks for his or her balance, we'll go over there on the lower right-hand corner where it says agent says, and it says your current account balance is $session.params.cust balance, because I've now taken that value from the webhook and push it into the agent, so it's now accessible within the agent. So I don't have to go back to the database again and again and again. All that information is now part of the instance of this running agent. Remember I said that at any point in the CX agent, I can ask to speak to a live agent. And I do that by creating a route group. And I create a route group called agent transfer. And agent transfer has one intent, which is agent. An agent has been trained to listen for things like transfer me to an agent, I need to speak to an agent, I need a customer service representative, things like that. When that intent is encountered, then the agent will say, please wait while I connect you to the next available agent, and then look a little below where it says live agent handoff. And this is built into Dialogflow CX that enables the system that is running this agent to know that somebody has invoked a request to speak to a live agent. Here's a piece of the CX documentation for live agent handoff. And notice how it says here, your system or integration can use this signal to take whatever actions are necessary to hand off the conversation. So Dialogflow CX doesn't know how to get to a live agent, but it tells the platform that is supporting this CX agent, and it's either going to be AXP or it's going to be outside of AXP, as you're going to see with my chat integration. It basically says it's your job to do something with this. Once you encounter this, you need to do something with it. And in this case, I'm going to move it into an AXP agent, and I'm going to show you how that's done in just a moment. I've logged into AXP administration to show you how that's done. Specifically, I'm going to look at two different things: workstream automation and orchestration. These are the tools that I'm going to use to allow me to have a flow that allows voice and chat to come in to be connected to a live agent. I begin with workstream automation. Here I create a virtual agent, and I give that virtual agent the characteristics of the Dialogflow CX agent that I just built. I give it a name. I called it Beyond Finance AI. I give it a language. I set the channel to voice. I'm only using this agent for voice and orchestration. I will use it outside of orchestration for chat, and I will explain that as I go further into the presentation. But here I set it to voice, give it a default language, and then I give it a description. That's the top image. The lower image is I go back to Dialogflow CX and I get the project ID for the agent. I get the name of the agent, that long string of numbers there. That's the name of the agent from within Dialogflow CX. And then I take the credentials file for the service account for this agent. Getting the credentials file and those things are beyond the scope of this presentation, but it's pretty easy to do, and there are explanations in Dialogflow and in Google as to how to get this information. But now that I have this information, I can save this virtual agent and use it later in orchestration. Now that I have created that automation, that virtual agent, I can connect that into orchestration. So if you look at the thing that says Beyond Finance AI on the upper left, that is an instance of the virtual agent that I just created. So when this flow is invoked, the first thing it does is it goes to the CX agent. If it needs an agent, if there is a connect with agent path, meaning that the caller asked to speak to an agent, and I took the the escalate handoff to live agent, then it will take that path, it will find the best available agent, and then it will go through all the orchestration stuff for that agent. If no agent is available at that time, it will do the wait treatment with music on hold or whatever it is. So that is the flow, but for the purposes of this presentation, all you really care about is that Beyond Finance AI block, and that is the Dialogflow CX agent. And that's all there is to a voice flow. So if somebody were to call a telephone number associated with this orchestration, they are going to go through the Dialogflow CX agent. It will do everything that I just explained that it will do. If you hand it off to a live agent, then it will go into orchestration, and then eventually, and to be answered, the call will be moved into an AXP contact center, and a live agent will answer it, or you'll get treatment that there are no agents available, but it will follow whatever path. Web chat is different. In this case, and again, there are always a million different ways to do things, but in this case, what I've done was I've taken it outside of any orchestration and I've invoked the Dialogflow CX agent through software. So I have a web application, and the web application uses the Google APIs for Dialogflow operations. When it comes time, and it allows me to go through all the different turns and the questions and the webhooks and all of those things exactly as if it were voice. When it comes time to escalate to a live agent, and remember when it showed you, when I showed you the documentation, it says live agent handoff, it's up to the system to handle that. Well, this is one of the systems that will have to handle it. The other one was the orchestration you saw above. There two different ways of doing this. Avaya provides a JavaScript chat SDK. And this SDK is a high-level approach to building chat applications, or you can go directly into the REST APIs. And the REST APIs allow you to do things like create a session, an engagement, send chat messages, and asynchronously receive AXP digital events. For instance, a user has been added to the chat, an agent has been added to the chat, the engagement has been deleted, a chat message received, etc. And you'll see a list of those in just a little bit. Now, when chat is escalated AXP, there is orchestration automation, but unlike the voice that you saw before, I don't have the bot built into orchestration. I'm doing that in my application, but I'm using the APIs to escalate to an orchestration, and then I'm also using automation in this example to show you how that can be used, and then it will find a live agent. And so I've moved the chat from a web page into chatting with a virtual agent to chatting to a live agent. And this is an example of a web chat application that I built. So you go to the Beyond Financial web page, and then you click the little chat button, and you'll see that it goes through the whole flow. Here's that welcome part. Welcome to Beyond Financial. My name is Byte, and I'm a virtual agent. It recognizes that it did not come through AXP orchestration, so it says, please provide me with your 10-digit telephone number. I give it a telephone number. It now sends the link to my mobile device. It tells me to say, just tell me when you're finished. And so Andrew, me, says I'm finished. It goes back to say, did Andrew really authenticate? And Andrew did. You've successfully authenticated Andrew Prokop. Notice how it knows my last name now. I never gave it my last name. If you look at the name I gave it at the top, it was just my first name. Now it knows that because it went through the authentication process, and as part of the Journey database record, it has my last name. And then it says, how may I help you today? So now I'm into the authenticated aspect where I have the database record. Now for this example, I'm going to escalate into chat orchestration. Now I've added something at the beginning here called start automation. And think of start automation as like the system providing some sort of IVR sequence before it gets to a live agent. And I just wanted to put this in here to show you how we can have multiple levels of things. So when I escalate to a live agent, the first thing I'm escalating to is the system. And the system is going to ask me a number of its own questions outside of Dialogflow in order to find the correct agent, the best agent for this chat. And the automation here is quite simple. You'll see there are two interactions. One's called the location selection, where I'm going to ask the user, what location are you coming in from? And then the next one is, do you really need to speak to an agent? So they're just two different questions. Again, think IVR that this is going to go through. I've shown this here because you're going to see that in just a second. So once I do the escalate to live agent, you will see how this comes into play. So in this example, I asked a few questions at the top. What are your CD rates? I also asked, which got scrolled off, was what is my account balance? And then the agent, actually I should say Andrew says transfer me to an agent. Now the virtual agent comes back and says, I should say the Dialogflow virtual agent says, please wait while I connect you to the next available agent. Now notice where it says, system, please confirm your city. Now this is the automation step. So I've connected into the contact center at this point. And now it's going through the automation. And Andrew says 1 for Mesa. And then remember the next interaction was, do you need help from an agent? And Andrew says yes. So I'm in that IVR portion. I'm not actually to a live agent just yet. But once I pass all of that and I say I do want to speak to an agent, the orchestration will now find me an available agent. Previously, I told you that there are two different ways of getting from the web page into AXP. Two different types of things. One of them is to use the JavaScript SDK, and this is a high-level SDK that abstracts all of the lower-level functionality and allows you to connect in at an object level. And so I just pulled a page from the documentation, and you'll find that in the Dev Connect program. So there's the link on how to get to this place. Or you can use the REST APIs. And so with the REST APIs, what I need to do is, the first thing I do is I need to create a session. And a session, think of that as multiple access sessions for different types of devices. So I can be on a computer, a mobile device, and it's the same person coming into the contact center through different sessions. Here is the create session documentation. Notice the link on the bottom. So I create a session. Next, I create a chat engagement on that session. And once I've done that, now I am connected into AXP as an incoming chat. So AXP will see there's a chat coming in, and it will go through the steps of either the automation, or if there is no automation, just go immediately into an agent. There's a lot of asynchronous information that can go back and forth at this point. Things like, I've been added to a chat session, an agent has been added to a chat session, an agent has left a chat session, an agent has typed a chat. So what I do is I subscribe to digital notifications. And those digital notifications allow me to give it a webhook that will then be invoked anytime anything happens on my chat channel. And if you look below, you'll see the link into the documentation for this. There are many different events that I will receive. This is one event. This is the agent was added to the chat. So look at the event type, it says participant added. You look at the participant type, it was an agent. You can see the agent's name. In this case, the agent has a simple name, Financial AI Agent 1 is getting added into my engagement. And so this will asynchronously come on the webhook once I've subscribed for digital events. If the agent enters a chat message, then I will get another digital notification. In this case, if we look at the middle where it says body, you will see that the agent has typed, "Hi Andrew, how can I help you today?" And so this will come into my application because I've subscribed to these digital events. Yet another, when the agent disconnects, I get event type of participant disconnected, and I can know that the agent has left the chat, and my application can take whatever action it wants to take. In the case of the little prototype I built, it just sort of ends the session and closes down the chat. If you're using the Java SDK, you don't have to go through the low-level things that I just showed you before. You can actually use basically the on programming technique, where I can subscribe to message arrived. So it says when a message has arrived, I want you to invoke this function, and then I can do whatever I want to do with it. And I can do that for all of the different event types. And here's a list of all the current event types. So engagement active, participant added, participant disconnected. You've seen some of these already. Engagement terminated, message arrived, message delivered, those sorts of things. So this is the JavaScript application. It can have the on nomenclature and then have these different event types and then get invoked when these things occur. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some GPT, generative AI. I mentioned that early on that there's some generative AI that occurs. And so when a chat is escalated to a live agent, what I want to do is use GPT to summarize the conversation. Under the covers, I'm actually doing sort of phony chat GPT type operation the entire time that the customer is chatting with the virtual agent. So even though Dialogflow is acting as the virtual agent, what I'm doing is I'm capturing its output and the customer's input as if it were communicating with something like ChatGPT. And I'm using, I'll eventually use this thing called the Chat Completions API from OpenAI. They're the people that are supplying all this technology. And what I do is I build up a series of role content entries in an array. And the role will be one of system, user, assistant, or function. And I'm only using system, user, and assistant. System prompt allows me to use prompt engineering to train the agent. User, the role of the user is anytime the user puts anything in there, anytime the user asks a question or puts any response. And then assistant is anytime that there's a response. And in this case, it's always the Dialogflow CX response. So I have a whole array of these of the system prompt, and then the response, the user, and then the response, what was the response from GPT. And I just keep building those into an array. And so when I'm finished, I can actually have what would be considered a GPT conversation, which really wasn't a GPT conversation, but I can go back and analyze that conversation with GPT. So if I look at my code, you'll see a few things. I use the system prompt. If you remember, there was the role of system, and this is where I define my virtual agent. And I use prompt engineering to say that I'm a virtual agent named Byte, who helps people manage their accounts at Beyond Financial Services. I give it a personality. I'm upbeat and friendly. I introduce myself when first saying hello, and I keep my answers brief. And then when it's time to summarize, as if the user actually typed the words, summarize the conversation in the user's language and bullet points in third-person point of view, next generate keywords, that gets sent in. And this is actually when I finally do take all that stuff that I built up with role, the roles and the response, and then I send that off to GPT and I say, hey, GPT, summarize this conversation for me. Because I don't want to present the agent with the entire transcript. I could, but I want the agent to hit the ground running by having just the summarization. And voila, whether I use the SDK or straight to the APIs, you will see how I'm now, this is Workspaces. I have an Avaya AXP agent logged in, ready to handle chat messages, and Andrew's chat comes in. And you'll see a little bit about the stuff with the kind of the IVR-ish type stuff. Do you need help from an agent? The question about where you located scrolled off. But then you see the summary of the user's conversation with the Dialogflow CX bot. And it does a really pretty good job where he talks about, greeting, asking for the telephone number, checked the authentication, made sure, and it said that the virtual agent successfully authenticated the user as Andrew Prokop. The user asked about the account balance. That was the part that scrolled off before, and I gave the account balance pulled from the database. The user asked about CD rates, and then finally the user requested to be transferred to a human agent. So the agent, when he or she gets this incoming chat, before anybody's typing anything other than this little IVR-ish stuff, knows all sorts of stuff about what just occurred. And this is pretty powerful stuff, really being able to hit the ground running. and to be able to respond proactively to the customer. And that's it. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope this made sense. I hope you learned a little bit about how to take a Dialogflow CX agent, or what we like to call is Google's CCAI, and then integrate that into AXP, whether through voice and using the virtual agent and automation and the orchestration, or using the APIs outside of AXP, but then moving it into AXP, either with the JavaScript SDK or to the APIs, straight to the APIs. And then finally, I've added some really interesting value by using OpenAI's GPT and chat processing in order to do a summary of the conversation, and then using the APIs to move that into the conversation with the agent. So now we're chatting back and forth using, again, either the APIs or the SDK. Thanks for watching.